Hello?
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Fuller? All right.
If you do not understand white supremacy, what it is, and how it works, everything else that you do understand will confuse you. In all of these 9 areas of activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Anywhere on the planet, minute by minute, day by day, all of the time, all of the time, all of the time.
All righty. Let's say welcome and good morning to the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. And I am your co-host, Mr. Bob. Good morning to you. Good morning, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning, sir.
Okay. A little difficulties here. Chat room is now open. If you'd like to get in contact with the show, you can do so by calling 516-453-9921. That's 516-453-9921. Or if you would like to Gmail the show, you can by doing this, the numeral 7, Mr. Bobby, B-O-B-B-Y, at gmail.com. And we will try to get you on here as soon as we can. Chat room is now open, and we have at least 2 people in the chat room already, so that's good. Having a little difficulty here, and my screen doesn't seem to be working properly, but we'll do what we can to get the show off to the start that it should get off to. I'm going to say something to my producer. If he could just give me on the headset while Mr. Fuller is talking, maybe we can see what's going on, because my screen is up, but I can't see the names of whoever I'm speaking with, not even my name or Mr. Fuller's name, but we'll work that out. Anyway, let's go here. Let's start off with a question from the Gmails. This comes from Malisala G. Says this: greetings, Mr. Fuller. Given that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, if an act of mistreatment occurs in a global system of justice and no one is around to perceive it, does it make a global system of injustice come into being? If mistreatment can exist without our perceiving it, can we ever truly produce a global system of justice, being incapable of correcting that which we cannot perceive?
Well, if you don't know about it, then there's nothing you can do about that. But the practicality of it is, if you're aware of something that's happening that shouldn't be happening, then you should take the action to prevent it from happening. There are things that will always be incorrect, misjudgments of all types and whatnot, but as soon as you perceive that something is not the way it ought to be, the way that it absolutely should be, then everybody who is aware of it should make everybody else who is aware of it who can do something about it and immediately correct what needs to be corrected. You make incorrections all day long. But see, the guarantee part of codification is being aware and making a deliberate effort to always be aware that non-justice is being practiced anywhere on the planet at any time, and corrected immediately if it can be corrected. And if it's not corrected, then you don't have justice. You're always striving for it, but that should always be the goal. People have said that's utopian, but you can call it whatever you want to. People try to deal with utopia each and every day anyway, because they try to make things the way that they ought to be, at least in their own way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But we need a global system where everybody is on the same page about what should be done about anything that is within the realm of being corrected by people. And that's the best answer you can give. In other words, you do the best that you possibly can. Now, somebody said, well, that's still not justice, just doing your best, but you can't really achieve your best. You're doing your best, but you're not achieving what should be done. But that should always be the goal, and anything short of that is unacceptable.
Okay. All righty. Well, there you go, Melissa. And Mr. Fuller, in answering your question. Okay, still we're having some problems here with the board, because now two people have disappeared from it. Again, the number to call in is, area code is 516-453-9921. I'm going to try this here as we try to work through our issues. I don't have your name up, but in the 770, I'm going to see if I can get you in here, see if you have a question, or are you just listening? Okay, I'm buffering here. Okay, can you hear me in the 770? No? Okay. Let me try you again. Okay, not on there. Okay, let's go to another question again as we work through these issues as best we can here. This comes from Yusuf. He says this: my question for Mr. Fuller has to do with the statement that he made, and Dr. Frances Cress Welsing wrote it in her book pertaining to the etymology of why white people hate black people. The statement Mr. Fuller made goes as follows, quote, most white people hate black people. The reason that most white people hate black people is because whites are not black people. If you know this about white people, you need to know little else, end of quote. My first question for Mr. Fuller is, does he still believe that to be true? If the answer is yes, and since Mr. Fuller always says that black people are pitiful, confused, and the least constructive people today in 2020, why would white people want to be black? Thank you.
The code presents itself in the form of thought, speech, and action. At the time that I wrote that, I presented that as a thought for people to think about that. Just like everything in the code, you first think about it and see if it's logical. And it might be at the time that I wrote that, I did that purely for a person to think about and come to his or her own conclusion, since nobody gives a reason why the situation between black people and white people is as it is, except the people who do give a reason, and that is that many white people, white supremacists, take the position that black people are supposed to be subordinate to people who are classified as white, and it has nothing to do with hate. It's just the way it is. It's the way that the creator of the universe made it. And some are quite vocal about it, but in this day and time, very few people are vocal about it. But they say, just look around at the evidence. Just look at what black people do when they are on their own. And there's no white people around. They don't do much of anything that's worthwhile, that's worth paying attention to. But when white people come around, then everything begins to work fine. And it has nothing to do with hate. So it's a thought presentation. Why do white people hate black people? Is it hate? May not be hate, but it's something for even black people or all people to think about. Is it hate that motivates white people to do the things that they do to black people? And if it is hate, why would a white person hate a black person unless the black person is doing something that shouldn't be done? And if the black person is just standing there being black and white people hate them simply because they exist, there's such a thing as a black person on the planet, is that grounds for hate? In other words, statement. It's not even a question, but it's a flat statement. But at the time that I wrote it, that was my intent, for people to think about it. And at the time, Dr. Wilson picked up on it, and she said, well, I'm going to see if that statement has any logic to it. And then she continued with her studies on it. I didn't take it any further. And even today, I don't take it any further because I don't really know if white people really hate black people. But I say that there's signs, if you go by the traditional definition of hate, there are signs that they do. So they also speak within the channel of something associated with black, the word dark or darkness. And just in the recent debates, people should replay that because I noticed it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The times that the presidential candidates, particularly Mr. Biden, he used the term darkness throughout, if I recall correctly, throughout many of his presentations. And, talking about, and traditionally, people talk about darkness as something to be eliminated. Even people who are very prominent in civil rights articulation talk about darkness as if it's something evil. Anything dark. Get rid of the darkness. Drive out the darkness. Bring in the light. Many preachers do that every Sunday. Get rid of the darkness. Well, see, you're really transmitting. Wait a minute. You look around in the church and you see a whole bunch of dark people. Well, is that a part of the getting rid of the darkness? Driving out the darkness and bringing in the light? Words are very important. In answer to the question, see, we need to think about all of these things, because I do. Mm-hmm. That's a duty. Think about every word that you use, and what are you talking about when you say, in a political sense, driving out darkness? I think the Washington Post has a logo right at the top of the page of the Washington Post every day, saying something about darkness. Democracy dies in darkness. Mm-hmm. I think that's the logo for the Washington Post newspaper, a leading newspaper. That ought to be thought about. Democracy dies in darkness? What are you talking about? You're talking about, when night comes, it's dark. So what are we talking about? What context are we talking about? That word darkness, the way it's used. And so naturally, a young white person coming up with a mind full of, the dark, be afraid of the dark, anything dark. Stamp it out, stomp on it, shoot it. Next thing you know, they look up and see a dark person and they say, hey, it's firing squad time. It's a thought.
It's a
we
thought.
need to really think about the use of that word darkness. Darkness exists because it should exist. That's why you have dark people. They exist because they should exist, because they're here. And is it associated with evil, something that should be eliminated from the universe? Darkness? No, you got to have darkness. And if you have them in the form of people, so what? Dark skin, so what? We need to think about that, and we need
think
to
about it.
We need to really think about that. How that word darkness is used just all over the place, all the time. Black people do it. They say it. Drive out the darkness, bring in the light. Do you know what we're saying? Drive out the darkness? Well, you got dark skin, Reverend. Drive you out with your dark skin and bring in some white people. That's the way it might register with somebody. Watch what you're saying. Every word counts.
Okay. Again, when you call into the show, call 516-453-9921, and be sure to press the number 1 button, and you're supposed to go to the top of the line. We are experiencing some issues here. The technicians are working on it. So right now, this is where we stand. Speaking about darkness, Mr. Fuller, there's a book out by Dean Koontz called The Eyes of Darkness, fictional book that he wrote back in 1981. And it describes what we are experiencing now with the coronavirus. And the little excerpts I've read, he even talked about, even in, I think it was Wuhan, China, describes it to its T. Now, using that word darkness, would what you just said, would that have any relevance to that, the eyes of darkness?
It could. See, it depends on how the word is used and what you're thinking about when you use it, and even if you are not aware. And this seems to be the case all over the world. Pay attention to what you're saying and what other people are saying. And does it really, are you speaking in tongues? Are you speaking in some type of metaphor? You have to make clear what you're saying, because people will associate that word darkness with everything that's evil. And when you see a dark-skinned person, that's evil. That's how that registers, whether you're aware of it or not. It's going to register that way because you started off in the kindergarten and telling people all over the world, darkness, darkness. That's something that you drive out. You drive out the darkness with the light. You drive it out. Whenever there's darkness, I mean, hey, turn on the light. Bring in the light. Bring in some people with light skin. And get rid of those people with the dark skin. That's what you're saying, whether you realize it or not, because that's how it all pans out. In the recesses of the mind, that's exactly the way it's going to work. So be careful with words. Be careful with your so-called, it's just a figure of speech. Well, that word figure rhymes with something else.
Oh, yeah. Okay. From the Gmails, this is Monday Craig. Says this, good morning, Mr. Fuller. With the death of George Floyd, many protests and riots broke out in response to this tragic death. I've heard you, Mr. Fuller, in the past mention that black people should not riot and tear things up in their neighborhoods. It seems that this uproar from the riots and protest forced the authorities to charge the cops that were responsible for Mr. Floyd's death. It seems like the rioting and protests produced the constructive result of getting the officers charged for this murder. My question is, do you think, Mr. Fuller, that the actions of the protesters and rioters was constructive, since it seems that is what caused the authorities to charge and arrest the officers involved in George Floyd's death? Based on past experience, it does not look like this would have happened without the rioting and protesting. Thanks, Monday Craig.
We have two factors here: protesting and rioting. According to the code, rioting should not be done at any time by anybody. A riot. Why? According to the code, people are harmed who should not be harmed. That's a no-no. You don't just harm anybody just because you're upset about something. So you just go out on the street shooting wild. Anybody who happens to be there gets hit. That should be stopped. None of that should ever happen. Turning over cars. You don't even know whose car it is. Might be the car of your cousin. And just running around screaming and yelling and throwing things in any direction, breaking out glasses. No, that's a riot. Now, it's been proven that you can get results by protesting. So you can have a riot, and the riot can be part of a protest, or you can have a riot that's not, a protest rather, that's not part of a riot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been proven that you can get results by protesting repeatedly, calling attention to whatever it is you want to call attention to, without breaking a window or turning over a car or 2 or 3 dozen cars and setting them afire. Cars are expensive. Temper tantrums. That shouldn't be. They just run wild all over the place. Doesn't make any difference. Start firing rifles into the air, and they go through a window and hit some 5-year-old. And you say, well, that's collateral damage. No, it's no such thing as collateral damage. If you're protesting Mr. Floyd's death, does that mean that you killed somebody else in a demonstration? And it doesn't make any difference who died, and you're not going to even mention that person's name. 5 or 6 people might die because somebody fired into a crowd. And the person who fired into the crowd may not be interested in what the protest is all about anyway. Mm-hmm. They just wanted to fire into a crowd anyway, which is something they would do if nobody was around and nobody was looking, because they like to shoot people. So you have all types of things that can happen. So what does the code say? Do not participate in riots. If you're demonstrating and someone starts breaking windows and setting fires to drugstores and all this type of thing, and apartment buildings, you back out and say, I don't have anything to do with this, and they don't have anything to do with me. I'm not a part of this, and they are not a part of, I don't know who they are or what their intentions are. Why? Because the white supremacists plant people to do that type of thing. So black people will start what you call peacefully demonstrating, and the next thing you know, you'll have some white people or some black people who've been paid. Doesn't take but just a few, 5 or 6, out of 1,000 people, and somebody starts just firing in different directions and run. And then the stampede is on.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take part in anything that leads to a riot. If a riot starts breaking out and you started your peaceful protest and the riot breaks out, every black person should immediately leave the scene. That's a signal. Now, you might say, well, hey, they'll do that. They'll just keep doing that anyway. Keep doing it. Yes, let them keep doing it. But you do your part, because not one person is supposed to be harmed in a peaceful protest. Not one person should be harmed who should not be harmed. And that includes law enforcement officers. If they get violent and whatnot, it's time to leave. But you can come back the next day, and they can get violent, and you'll let them leave again. If they are violent and they provoke the violence, or when you were peacefully demonstrating and obeying the law, you got a permit to have your demonstration. We're prisoners of war. We should act disciplined. If we're in a war, like soldiers, they have discipline. Wildness is out. Black people are always accused of being wild in everything. That's our nature. Need to be tamed. No. We shouldn't have that reputation, but we got it.
Okay. Before we go to break here, Mr. Fuller, one of the questions that has been asked in the chat room is, are you familiar with the Browder files, Browder, Browder or Broder files? And if so, can you expound on how the strategies of that text and what are your are related? Are you familiar with the Browder files?
I have heard of a book with that title, I believe, but I've never read it.
Okay.
I'm not aware of what's in it.
Okay. All righty. KJJ, I did ask Mr. Fuller, as you just heard, but he's not familiar with it. So the second part about the strategies, since he's not familiar with it, I don't know if that would he could be or related with that. But anyway, that question was asked. Thank you, Pro Design 29 South, for entering the chat room and joining the conversation. We are still having a little difficulty in receiving calls right now. It says I have 7 on the board, but I only see 1, 2, 3, 4, and those 2 of those are Mr. Fuller and myself. So we will get that done. Why don't you go ahead and cue the music up for me, and I'll get this out the way now. Okay, welcome. You are listening to the Counter-Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., and I am your co-host, Mr. Bobby. To get in contact with the show, again, call 516-453-9921. Be sure to press the number 1 button, and you will go to the top of the line if I can get you up there. We are dealing with a few issues, but bear with us. You can Gmail me at the numero 7, Mr. Bobby, Bobby, and I will, since we're having a little difficulty here, try to get those on as much as I possibly can. There's always some issues going on, and I don't know if the usual suspects are involved with that, but we will do what we can do. The Counter-Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., that's what you're listening to right now. From the chat room, Pro Design 29 South says this, Mr. Fuller. I don't know if you are aware of it, but says that the officer charged in George Floyd's death argues it was the drug overdose that killed him and not the knee on the neck. Now, Mr. Fuller, have you seen the video of the officer with his knee on his neck for almost 9 minutes? Have you seen that?
Yes, I have.
Okay, now, seeing that officer with his knee on his neck and George Floyd's, I think last words were, I can't breathe, wouldn't that seem to nullify the officer's argument that Mr. Floyd had fentanyl in his system? That was the drug I think that they said he had. But it's being argued now that the fentanyl caused his death. Now, I know you weren't privy to all the circumstances of the situation, but you did see the video, as you just stated. What are your thoughts on that right now, as you see it from a codified aspect or perspective?
It seems like he died from the knee on the neck. That's how it seems to me. But that might not be the case. He could have died from a drug overdose. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. That's why I say what I always say. Regardless, we are prisoners of war. If you have black skin and you're on a planet called Earth, you are a prisoner of war. So you expect this type of thing to happen. Arguing back and forth and whatnot about, well, this technicality and that technicality. A prisoner of war should expect to be shot in the head for no reason at all. Period. Black people have to get through that through their minds. They have to think that way all day, every day, everywhere on the planet. If you're a person of color, you should expect this. Now, arguing the points of view of this and that and the other and all like that, it's like Mr. Gandhi said after the Answar incident in India. Anybody who have seen the movie, when they were talking about, well, the law enforcement officer, the General Dyer, that was his name, who was officiating over the deaths of over 1,000 people in a public square, turned the rifles on small children and females, everybody who was in the crowd. They just opened fire on the crowd. I mean, and just kept firing. I mean, as long as anybody was moving, they kept firing. Because that's what the general, an army general, had ordered in India. And when they called in Mr. Gandhi to discuss the matter, he just simply said, well, you're acting the way that people act when they are conquerors. You have conquered us, so you humiliate us by killing us or doing anything you want to do. And he took that position. He said, and I didn't come here to discuss General Dyer, like black people always, like in this case, let's get the officers. We're dealing with an entire system. The officers are going to continue to do this, folks. Why? Because the system demands it. And what is the system? It's called the system of white supremacy, and we got to fit our tongues to say that over and over and over again. And the individual names of this officer and that officer, that the white supremacists love it. Well, we're gonna look into it. We will go and investigate, and we're going to have an exhaustive investigation. We're not going to tolerate this. And let's see, let's take about 17 years, to look into this particular officer's misconduct. And we'll have a retrial and a retrial after the retrial and whatnot. And finally, we might just dismiss the case for not enough evidence, or we will send a couple of them to jail for life. And you people should be satisfied. Go back to your stables where you belong. Get back into the camp wire and whatnot, and continue doing what you're doing. Carry out the orders of the system of white supremacy until the next incident happens, which will be next Thursday. That's the scheme. So we should address the entire system all the time, every time, and start talking about individual officers, the police. No such thing as police brutality. It's the system of white supremacy. That's what you're dealing with. Law enforcement officers act based on what they're told to do. They're told to do this in the system of white supremacy. If they're race soldiers, and people don't do things unless they know they can get away with it. And why can they get away with it? On account of the system that backs them up. That's why. That's any people, including me. I know when to back down. I know when to not do something. And I know when I can get away with something. Why? Because there's always somebody who decides what they'll let me get away with. So you always aim at the person who, hey, even the mafioso understands that. Even looking at the movie The Godfather, you learn that lesson. What did the Don say, even among themselves? Don Corleone. He said, I never knew until today. It was Barzini all the time. In other words, they mentioned the word buffers. You got a lot of buffers. What is a buffer? That's a person that's put up to look like they're running the whole show. But that individual officer, he's acting independently. I mean, it's nothing, he's not connected with nothing. I mean, he doesn't have to answer to nobody and all like that. That's not true. People who've been in the Army know that. I've been in the Army, and guys would actually fight in the barracks, and there's rifles all over the place. We have our rifles stacked up right there in the middle of the barracks. We did. Our M1 rifles, they were right there.
Yes.
The Garand. Yeah. But when the guys fight, they fought with their fists or something like that. I mean, they'd go out on Saturday night and come back and start fighting among themselves, and nobody would grab a rifle. Why? Somebody could sneak a bullet. They had an accountability for bullets, but there are ways to get your hands on a M1 rifle bullet, 30 caliber, but nobody would ever go to that rifle rack and get a rifle. Why? Because the consequences were dire. That's why. That's why. You would think that Marines and soldiers and people like that would be killing each other all the time when they go on these drunken brawls. Marines fighting Navy guys and all like that. Well, they do it traditionally. I don't know how much they do now, but they used to. And it was just a regular thing, but very little killing, if ever. There's a reason for that. Consequences. Ironclad consequences. That's why.
Okay. Before I go on here, have you seen the pictures, Mr. Fuller, of the 17-year-old boy, his name escapes me, that was walking down the street with the AK-47? To my understanding, he did kill 2 people and injured 1. He was a white boy. Did you see that picture or video of that?
I saw that of what they showed.
What they showed, and I understand that over $200,000 has been raised by certain Christian organizations for his defense. And from what I have seen and what has been discussed over the news media, it's been suggested that had he had showed himself walking down the street with that AK-47 in full view of the law enforcement officers, and they did nothing about that, but it's been suggested that if that were a black boy that had the same situation, that bodily harm or even he would have been killed for doing the same act in the system of white supremacy racism. Would that be the case, in your opinion?
In the system of white supremacy, a white person is much more valuable than a black person of any status. That's what white supremacy means. A black person is not worth anything. They're just in the way, according to the white supremacists. I mean, move them out of the way and build a horse stadium or whatever. They're not good for nothing but making trouble. So, a white person, you pay a lot of attention to a white person, and you give them a lot of benefit of a doubt in the system of white supremacy. That's what white supremacy means.
Yes, sir.
We have to understand that. Black people don't understand that we are in a war, and we are born, if you're black, as a POW. If anybody asks any black person, were you in the war? Every black person can say, absolutely. I was born in the middle of a war, and I was made immediately a prisoner. While I was in the womb, I was a prisoner of war. You talking about POWs? I'm one. You talking about veterans of a war? You better believe if you're black, you're a veteran. You say, well, you a vet? Yes, absolutely. I'm a veteran of the longest war in recorded history. There ain't no war longer than this in recorded history.
All right.
The system of white supremacy.
Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Let me see if I can get you in here. First, let's see if we can get Dollar Bill in here. Dollar Bill, now I've pushed the button. There we go. Maybe we're buffering. Dollar Bill, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr.
Okay.
Bobby. Can you hear?
Okay, Dollar Bill, go ahead. We're having a little problems here, but thank you for responding here. Go ahead with your question for Mr. Fuller, my brother.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. Once again, thank you, Mr. Fuller, for that those words. It was really quite insightful. I just wanted to comment about the rioting because we know that Martin Luther King had spoke about rioting, and he said that I think that we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear the economic plight of the Negro. Poor has worsened over the last few years. So I wanted to ask you, I said that to you because you brought up, you were talking about rioting. I had a question in regard to the book with sex. So I don't know how you want me to do this, Mr. Bob.
Well, go ahead. You're so far. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just leave that with the rioting part. And I think also, so let me go with my question, which I'm going to go right to the book.
Okay.
Which is, I'm going in the area of sex. And what it is, I'm at page 180 in the original edition. And it
in the original edition?
In the original edition,
okay.
Page 180.
Okay.
And
yeah, go ahead. Mr. Fuller, do you have the original edition, page
I
180? Okay. All right, go ahead, Dollar Bill.
All right, so it says on page 180, as long as white supremacy dominates the non-white people of the known universe, consider no non-white person as married. Practice using the expression attempting marriage and or attempted marriage. And then you give your reasons and your explanations for this, and then your summation, which is on page 181, where you address that any persons who are subject to the power of unjust persons cannot be married. Any persons who are subject to the power of unjust persons do not have the power to do justice to each other nor to others. Any persons who do not have the power to do justice are not married and cannot be married to anybody. I'm not going to finish it, for time's sake, but I was just wondering if you could just elaborate on that. I would say if you could finish it reading yourself, and then at that last part where it says God, etc., then maybe you can give us some thought on that. And I'll take my answer offline. Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, these are a series of statements that a person can take into consideration because everything in counter-racist codification is for the individual to make his or her decisions about. And here again, I'll say what I said at the beginning of this program today, thought, because we were thinking about why do white people hate black people?
Yes.
And so I gave a synopsis, or you might say a theory or a thought that, well, they hate black people because they're not black. White people are not black people. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's for people to think about because we're talking about hate here. So here again, when we talk about sex, is a black person married, prisoner of war, born in a prison, Can prisoners of war be married? What is a marriage? Well, we usually think of marriage as being, you can take care of somebody and they can take care of you. Prisoners of war can't take care of themselves. So they're not eligible to take care of anybody. If you understand being a prisoner of war, you're a baby. You've been gone back to the crib because that's what a cell is. That's what a concentration camp is. You go back to being a baby, or if you're born in one, you remain a baby. You are not what they call, quote, unquote, grown. So a person who's not grown can't take care of themselves and therefore can't take care of anybody else, because a person who can't take care of themselves cannot take care of somebody else. So it's kind of understood that if you have a care mate, you're supposed to be able to do something for that mate. Care mate meaning someone you're wedded to, someone you're married to. That's what the code calls a care mate. But if you are not capable caring for yourself, you can't care for anybody else. And that's the status of the black male and the black female. They can't really guarantee anything to each other. Why? Because both of them, like myself, I have to answer to the white supremacists for every move I make. Every move I make. They feed me, they clothe me, they tell me where I can go, they tell me whether or not I'm going to have a roof over my head, they tell me what street I'm going to be on, they tell me where I can go in the universe and where I bet not go. That's what white supremacy means. And I'm born in a camp called the System of White Supremacy, which is a concentration camp for non-white people. And I was born in it. It's called the planet Earth. Black skin, you're a prisoner of war. Prisoners of war are not eligible for marriage. But we go through a ceremony called marriage because the white supremacists allow us to do that. Mm-hmm. But they laugh at that because they know we're not really married. And if we really look at it and search for the truth, that's true. Why? Because a prisoner of war cannot be married. Why? Why is it that a prisoner of war is not married? Well, I got a ring and I got some papers saying that I'm married. That means nothing if you're a prisoner of war, because you can't take care of anybody. You're not anybody's care mate. You're going back to babyhood if you ever got out of it. And in the case of black people, you never got out of it if you were born in it. That's why we're called boys and girls. Sometimes the white supremacists will slip up and call us that. Hey, boy. Hey, gal. Never grown. Mm-hmm. Never an adult in the traditional sense of being one. That's why that's on the pages that I gave.
Yes.
It's something to think about and come to your own conclusions. Are these statements true or false? That's what you should ask.
Okay. Let's see here. You are listening to the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller, Jr. If you'd like to get in contact with the show or you have a question, this is the number you call, 516-453-9921. And when you do that, ma'am, when you do that, sir, please make sure if you have a question to hit press the number 1 button, and you will go to the top of the line or the in line to be answered next in sequence. So make sure you do that. On my screen I have 9 callers, but I have one that I'm going to go to after Brother Muko comes on. He's the only one so far that has pushed the question button. But if you have a question or even a comment for Mr. Fuller, then make sure you hit that button and then you will be lined up. Now, at this time, briefly, we're going to have Mr. Fuller speak about his book that we've been basically talking about since the program began. Mr. Fuller, this is the book time. Go ahead, please, sir.
Go to producejustice.com. producejustice.com. And what will come up on the screen is a brief description of the textbook, the basic textbook, the latest version, which is the 2016. The previous version of the basic textbook was 1984. And we just, a caller just read from passages in the 1984 edition. But the 2016 edition takes in most of the material that's in the 1984 edition, and much more added to it. That's why it's called the Revised Expanded Edition, but it takes in almost all of the material that's in the 1984 edition. But some people say they like the 1984 edition, and they get both of them. For what reasons, I don't know. And some people just say they prefer the 1984 edition because they can comprehend what's in it. Maybe since at least 3 or 4 people have said that to me, I think maybe I might have been a better writer in 1984 than I was in 2016, even though I say that my own material is very poorly written.
Mm-hmm.
But I say it's one of the best of the worst volumes you can get on counter-racist science. And I recommend my books within that realistic frame of reference because I can't cut myself any slack when it comes to the vehicle. Right.
Yes, sir.
I just tell it like it is. But go to producejustice.com. And also there's an additional book there, a volume. It's an addition to the 2016 basic called the Compensatory Counter-Racist Word Guide. But go to producejustice.com. The material is all there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have Brother Mark get me a copy of that 1984 edition. Since everybody keeps talking about that, I need to have that, so I'll check that out.
Oh, you should have had it. I mean, I should have seen to it that you got one. I thought maybe you did have one or two. I can provide that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fuller. I appreciate that. Yeah, I need that because people are referring to that, and I'd like to have a copy. Okay, thank you. Okay, let me do this. Here's my man, Brother Muko from Bmore or Baltimore, for those that don't know, with his care unit there, and then he told me he has one down in Atlanta and a few other cities. Brother Muko, welcome to the program, and thank you for holding and thank you for calling. Go ahead, kind sir.
How you doing, Mr. Bobby and Mr.
I'm
Fuller?
good, sir.
I have, we definitely still had a care unit here, and this has been a wonderful show. Apologies for last week, missing last week, but it was an awesome broadcast, Mr. Fuller. But my question for you today, Mr. Fuller, who you were referring to, Mr. Bobby, is Kyle Ruttenhouse.
Yes,
that was the young guy's name. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
And that was, that situation that's going on and a lot of situations that I see going on around my city, Washington, D.C., where Mr. Fuller is, even in Ohio. Mr. Fuller, can you expound for my care units and especially for the new added care unit in Wisconsin, can you please explain for our care units how the white supremacists play both sides of every argument? I mean, we're seeing that a lot here, especially what happened with this young guy, this young white supremacist, Kyle Ruttenhouse. And you see everybody's funding his legal fund. Can you show how that's white supremacists first being on code and playing both sides of this argument?
Yes. The white supremacists figured out a long time ago. When you take all sides, position yourself where you can take all sides of every argument, what does that guarantee? That guarantees that you're not going to lose. Why? Because you're taking all sides. And you're going to be the strongest voice on all sides of every argument. So how can you lose an argument when you've taken all sides of every argument? And you're the strongest, and you take the strongest position on all sides. And the white supremacists, when they walk into any situation, they're figuring that right from the beginning. They say, well, we got 2 or 3 sides. We got about 5 different tribes here. They all having disputes among themselves. Well, we are going to position ourselves to back up all 5 of those tribes in their argument, but we will all have our own agenda for all of them, but they won't know what we're doing, okay? But we will know what we're doing. That's the key. So the white supremacists are greatly skilled at that. They walk into any situation, and the first thing they do, they don't start doing a lot of talking. They just observe. And they may observe for a long time. And then they figure out, oh, okay, this is the way these people on this side think. And this is the way these people over here think. And then there's a third group over there, and they think this way. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to place our people right in the middle of each one of those 3 groups. And when they all come to the table, arguing among themselves, we are going to be there, taking all sides, but we're going to figure out in advance how it's all going to end up. They're not going to know what hit them. It's just like Humphrey Bogart, people who play chess in the movie Casablanca, Rick Blaine, when they first show him in a scene, when he first appears in that movie, he's doing what? Sitting in his own nightclub. He's playing chess. And who is he playing chess with? With himself. In other words, he's making moves on his side of the board, and he's also making the moves on the other side of the board. How can he lose? He's the one that's manipulating both sides. The white supremacists are the most skilled people on the planet at doing that. Black people are not even aware of it. They know how to plant themselves firmly on every side of every argument before they get involved at all. And that way they know that when the smoke clears, they're going to come out the winner because they took all sides.
They have all the angles.
They know somebody's going to win, but whatever side wins, it's still them. They're all working together. That's it.
Again, they have all the angles covered.
Everything you cover. So that's why they're successful.
Okay.
They're the most successful government that the world has ever seen. Nothing works as smoothly as a system of white supremacy. Nothing in history.
Even in this coronavirus thing.
Absolutely.
Okay. Brother Muko, thank you. Don't be a stranger, brother. I know you won't be. No apologies needed for last week. That's okay. Thank you for calling. Okay, we've come to the end of the first hour of the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the second hour of the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller. I'm going to give it about 5 seconds, and then we will start the second hour of the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. Okay, welcome back. You are listening to the second hour of the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. I am your co-host today, Mr. Bobby. And if you would like to reach Mr. Fuller, you can do so by calling this number, 516-453-9921. And if you will, kind sir, kind ma'am, press the number 1 button so that you can go to the top of the line. I must tell you, for whatever the reason, we are having a little bit of an issue, but my producers and technicians are providing me and Mr. Fuller with the best results so that you can get through. But just mind you that we're having some slight issues with that, but you will be heard. particularly if you have a question and you press that number 1 button, my technician told me that you will go to the top of the line, as Everett did, which I will get to in just a moment. You can also reach me by Gmail, and that is 7mrbobby@gmail.com. And I think today, if you try that, we might be able to expedite you and get you on there. Chat room is open. Pro Design 29 South is in the house. Africani is there, and I just call him KJ. JJ, he's in the house. And he mentioned this to you, Mr. Fuller. He said, wait a minute. He mentioned a couple of things here. Let's see here. He says, thank you for answering his question. And he said the complete title of that broader strategy is The Survival Strategies for African Americans in America by Anthony T. Browder. He resides in Washington, D.C., Mr. Fuller, the same city you reside in. So that's the genesis of my question. Theme-wise, it seems they are very complementary texts with both blending both strategies and tactics to help non-white people to survive this barbaric system of white supremacy. Thank you for asking my question. And then he said, Mr. Fuller, you're absolutely right. It's amazing that I've never viewed myself as a prisoner of war, and it fits. Having deployed on this exact date, September the 1st, 1990, as a U.S. soldier in the Army, U.S. Army, it has caused double mental trauma or sorts. Mr. Fuller's texts have helped to ground me so many years later from my second war. Last night, it was extremely difficult, but I look forward to the morning to listen to such this show as a motivation. So, Mr. Fuller, you are, and your books and so forth are helping my brother over here, and he just wanted to make mention of that, and I read that over the air. Thank you. Chat room is open. You can, if you have a question or comment you'd like for me to read, put it on the chat, and if I have the space, I will do that. But right now, we are going to go to the phone lines. Let me see if I could cue you in, Everett. Let me see here. Okay, we're buffering, and let's see. There we go. Everett, I hope that you can hear me. Can you hear me, Everett?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Okay, you are on live and can be heard
Morning,
worldwide. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yes, my question is, a couple months ago, former President commented saying that Mr. Trump, he condones white supremacy and bigotry. And I believe it was last week, Joe Biden made a reference saying Mr. Trump, he doesn't say anything towards white supremacy, going back to the Charlottesville in North Carolina. Mr. Fuller, is it important, is it code for white people to point out white supremacy like that, or does that hold the same value as me, a person of color, pointing out white supremacy, or do they hold more value?
Oh, the white people are more valuable all over the world, more than any non-white person. I mean, that's what white supremacy is about. If you're talking about the value of a person, that's the standard. That's the gold standard, being white, having white skin. I mean, that go to the front of the line for everything that is of value. And if there's any scraps left, that's for the throwaway people, the people with dark skin, because they're nothing but scraps themselves. They're scraps of humanity, just bits and pieces. But a real person is a person with white skin. That's the premier. That's the god and the goddesses of the entire universe. So naturally, they squabble among themselves. If you're looking at it within the context of the system of white supremacy, I can't call any white person of any status a white supremacist. The code does not allow that for logical reason. I can't prove it. But I can suspect and should suspect that every white person who is able to be a white supremacist should be suspected of being one. Why? Because I don't have a master list of who is and who is not a white supremacist. So as a victim of white supremacists, you can suspect any white person of being a white supremacist if they are able to be. Now, if they're not able to be, if they're disabled, they don't know one color from another. That's disabled, because you have to know your colors. You have to be able to tell blue from purple, or green from orange, or black from white, or brown from white, or yellow from white. You have to be able to do that. Otherwise, you cannot be a white supremacist. So that's one of the first things you learn. You have to know your colors. But at a certain age, even if a person used to be a white supremacist, if that's the answer to your question, by used to be, I mean a person who used to say that they believed in white supremacy. And some white people will say that. But as years go by, they may become disabled, where they can't tell one color from another. Once you can't tell one color from another, you can no longer function as a white supremacist. And so you can't suspect that person of being a white supremacist if they can't tell one color from another. But you can suspect every other person who knows one color from another of being a white supremacist, and you should. That's
so
the duty.
Joe Biden and former President Bush, when they call out white supremacy, they have more value calling it out rather than me.
Oh, absolutely. And you should never say that a white person is a white supremacist, because now the burden of proof is on you. And you're going to have to get another white person to back you up. You're going to have to go and get a black person cannot back you up to verify that any white person is a white supremacist. In the system of white supremacy, that will never work. Anybody who's tried it found that out.
Only white people can call out white supremacy?
If now, I just made a flat statement. Now, anyone who doesn't believe that's true, try it. No black person can prove that a white person is a white supremacist in the system of white supremacy. It cannot be done. It cannot be allowed. If a black person charges a white person with being a white supremacist, and that black person goes to get another black person, like on a job, to back him or her up, prove it, that's not going to fly for a very logical reason. If the white supremacist system would allow that, then every black person was, a black person could just stand up right now and say, well, all white people are white supremacists. And how far do you think that's going to go? So if you try it, like on a job, if you accuse a white person of being a racist, and that white person says, all right, buddy, you call me a racist, you call me a racist, prove it. Prove it with your black self. You will come in my office and call me a racist. It'll be the same thing as what happened to Andy Dufresne in the movie Shawshank Redemption when he said something about the warden being obtuse. And the warden says, you're a prisoner, and you come in my office and call me some strange word talking about I'm being obtuse. I'll show you obtuse. 6 months in a hole or whatever.
Yeah. All right, Brother Everett. Hey, listen, thank you, man, for calling. Do not be a stranger, and we appreciate you very, very much. Thank you. Before I get to the phone line, listen, callers, okay, I got Imani coming up. I got somebody in the 909, somebody in the 334. be sure that you give the call screener your name so that I can get you on here, because right now, not your fault, but for some reason, it could be my system, it's not functioning properly, but my technicians, my wonderful technicians, or Mr. Fuller's and myself, wonderful technicians, are really doing a good job. There you go, Richard. Got Richard in there. They're really doing a good job and getting and keeping us together. Before I go to Imani, let me say this. Let me do this. This comes from Bill, Mr. Fuller. He says, my question this week is, does eliminating the system of white supremacy racism eliminate the problems of injustice of children, women, gays, and the disabled who state that they are being discriminated upon like non-whites?
No, but that's the first step, because all this is happening on the watch of the white supremacists. That's why they are supreme. So anything, if you're on a ship, the Titanic, and the ship is sinking, whose fault is it? The captain. And the captain of the entire world of dark people, people of color, tends, are the white supremacists. You got color in your skin, you come under the system of white supremacy. Anywhere on the planet. You come under them, directly and indirectly, in all 9 areas of activity. Economics. If you don't believe it, just try to do anything in economics on any kind of scale at all. You're going to be dealing with the white supremacists if you're a person of color. And they are going to call the shots in economics. The use of your time, your energy, whatever money you can get your hands on, they control it. Even if you print it yourself, they control the value of it, because they control the value of what? You. Education, all over the world, you see people of color saying what? Which way did the white folks go? I got to get my education. How am I going to get educated? You better be starting looking for some white people if you're going to get educated. All right?
Yes.
And for those who say that's not true, look at the people who are in those boats falling into the ocean, sometime with their children on their backs or in their arms, screaming and yelling, trying to get back in the boat. Why? Which way did the white folks go? Well, why are you looking for white folks? So I can get my education. I understand they have a lot of wonderful institutions where I can get educated, because I can't get educated in this little village where I am, because I'm a person of color in a small village, and my education is 10,000 miles away, wherever the white folks are. Go to all the other areas of activities, it's the same thing. See, we got to know how helpless we are, and stop pretending we got power.
All righty. Let me do this. Let me go to Imani. Let me see here. Okay, Imani, you are on and you can be heard. Go ahead with your question for Mr. Fuller, and good morning.
Greetings, everyone. It has been said recently, Mr. Fuller, Mr. Bobby, the Produce Justice audience, that non-white black people who participate in sports, the people activity of entertainment, by playing sports, have power by, quote-unquote, boycotting their workplace and or the events that they practice for, such as, I believe, maybe a year ago at the University of Missouri, it took place with the football team, the black players on the football team, the recent NBA situation and WNBA situation over, quote-unquote, police reform and social justice. My question is that so? And if it's not so, what are the weaknesses of such a maneuver event? And if, quote unquote, all non-white black entertainers, period, whether they sing, dance, flip, play an instrument, just all of a sudden just walked off of their jobs, would that end the system of racism, white supremacy? Those are my questions, sir. Thank you.
No, it wouldn't end it because that's just one category. You have to end racism in all areas of activity. There's no such thing as a little bit of poison. But you do what you can in the prison system called the system of white supremacy. That's why I'll refer to the movie again, Shawshank Redemption. Prisoners. See, when you think of yourself as a prisoner, what do you do in a prison? You do what you can. If you can negotiate with the warden, like the character in that movie, Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne did with Warden Norton, he negotiated to get a library into the prison. Now, that didn't get him out of the prison, but he benefited from the library, and other prisoners benefited. Little Tommy Williams, he came there, and he didn't know how to read or write. But by getting instructions from an instructor in the library, which was Andy himself, I mean, he learned his ABCs, and he began to think about things he never thought of before, because now he can read and write. I mean, you know, he was what's supposed to be a grown person, but he couldn't read or write or spell. All right? So it's the same thing with the people who are in sports and entertainment or any other thing that you are allowed to do in this vast prison called the system of white supremacy. You do what you can. Red ran a little business on the side there, getting stuff that nobody else could get. Cigarettes, some of it very harmful. Cigarettes are harmful, but he'd get it anyway. Pictures of nude women. I mean, he'd get that for you if you wanted it. I mean, you know, that was harmful. But Red had a little business. He was learning something about how to do what? Be a capitalist. Basic capitalism, okay? So you do what you can as a prisoner of war. Prisoners of war, people who have actually, you know, been in what we call classically POWs, they know something about that, little things that you do inside the prison and being able to go negotiate some things with the guards or somebody, you know. You do what you can, and that's no different. But you're not actually destroying the prison system, but you can get in position to do that.
Okay. All righty. Imani, thank you so much for your call. Do not be a stranger. And appreciate you, my brother. Richard, before we go to you in California, Mr. Fuller, since you mentioned movies, Bunbo said this. Hello, Mr. Bobby. Can you ask Mr. Fuller whether he has watched the movie or read the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and what lessons he found to hold for him?
I saw
Have you
the
seen
movie.
that movie, Mr. Yeah.
I've seen the movie. It's not on my list,
okay.
But people have told me that it should be. But it's the major lesson in that movie is mind manipulation, which the white supremacists are excellent. That Nurse Ratched shows how that's done. People who want to learn something about how you can maneuver people in a very nice way and make them slaves to you and do it in a very nice way without beating you or anything, because the inmates of that institution were volunteers. They turned themselves over. They turned their minds over to someone who they perceived to be stronger than them, okay? And that person who they perceived to be stronger than them was actually stronger than them mentally. And so that Nurse Ratched, all right, who's supposed to be helping them mentally, was actually keeping them enslaved. Because where does enslavement start? It starts in the mind. If you really want to do an excellent job. Now, I want to make a correction there. It can start any kind of way, in the mind and body. That's usually how it starts. But you capture a person's body. But if a person is weak-minded to start with, then you can use your mind to manipulate that person to do your bidding. And anybody who sees that movie, that lesson stands out in the movie. Because the character played by Jack Nicholson could see what she was doing, and when he realized it, he realized that he was looking at pure evil.
Yes.
Because a person who can manipulate people's minds in a manner that they don't even understand that they are being manipulated, and even if they do understand they are being manipulated, they embrace it anyway. Now that is evil personified. And you keep yourself in a baby state. You keep yourself in a baby state. And you learn more and more to be manipulated. And you embrace being manipulated. It's just like black people being on drugs, or anybody on drugs for that matter. You're being manipulated and you know it.
Mm-hmm.
But you just got to have it anyway. You know you're getting weaker. You know you're not getting stronger. But you're just going into weakness because you have been manipulated into worshiping being a weak person. And a lot of black people fall into that.
Mr. Fuller, let me ask you this. I wasn't around when this happened, but you were, because you've been in in war zones. Based on what you just said, a master manipulator, so to speak, would Adolf Hitler qualify as a person who was like that, pure evil, a master manipulator of people?
Say that.
Adolf Hitler, would he be qualified in the last statement that you made about?
One could say that. I mean, from what I've read and heard, Adolf Hitler was a master manipulator, and people wanted to be manipulated because they had, I think, they had say, we have tried everything else. See, and when sometimes in desperation, people will just say, oh, yeah, well, I know this might get real ugly, but, I mean, for me, it can't get any uglier than it already is. And so when you can catch people in that state of mind, and I understand at the time Hitler rose to power, he caught people at that state of mind when they were just desperate for anything, all right? And that's when a master manipulator can move in and capture people's imaginations, in particular if he can show some results. Oh, he or she is off to being a real tyrant. The system of white supremacy itself is tyrannical in doing that. Find people who are in a weak position, any kind of weak position, weak-minded kind of way, and go in with full force manipulating their minds, and their bodies will follow.
Okay. Before I take the next caller, let me say this. Two things. Number one, when you call in and you do hit that, press the number 1 button, be sure, ma'am, be sure, sir, to give your name to the call screener so that I can give you the call. Now, I have 2 callers up, but your names have not been identified yet. But do that so I can properly introduce your name. Mr. Fuller, Mr. Julius has this to say. He said, first off, that he wants to thank you for your weekly radio show and the information you give. But he says, secondly, he said there is a missing term and defining of the term, which is administrative gerrymandering. I believe it's in the labor section of the 2016 edition. I have researched the term by standard definition. However, I greatly be in greater learning if Mr. Fuller could correct it in the book immediately, and if possible, define the term. Thank you again, and I will not be a stranger, okay? I think the term is administrative gerrymandering?
Yes, it's missing from the book, even though it's in the content section. It was a very short miss, but it should be explained, and it wasn't. And that's got to be taken care of. So a lot of books out there with that error in it. There's some other errors in there too. I mean, that I haven't discovered, I'm sure, and which other people have discovered. Because even in the 1984 edition, but the people who, in both instances, the 1984 edition and the other editions, the people who were handling the book at that time were under a lot of stressful circumstances. They were non-white people, and like all non-white people, for the most part, we have our stressful circumstances. And so I tried to stay on top of everything, but there were some errors made in these textbooks. That's why I say they're poorly written, because they're, a lot of them are not pronounced. There's enough material in here, I think, to carry the books forward, but those errors have to be corrected if I can find time and space and to do it. I'm trying to pull a lot of things together and trying to write books and trying to go here and do this and do that, and just the everyday things. I mean, Neely Fuller, is a person who has to do his own grocery shopping and all that, okay? So these things happen, and they're oversights. I try to stay on top of things, keeping these errors from being made. So I'm apologizing for it, because there's not supposed to be any errors anywhere in codification. And so I'm to blame for that.
Okay.
Apologies are not acceptable in codification. You either do it or you don't.
Okay.
So the caller who has noticed this, they have a legitimate complaint there.
Okay.
I won't say complaint. I'll say report. That's a report. That's an official military report. And they're a huge mistake. Some people can say huge. I say, but it's huge enough because it is a mistake.
Okay, I'm going to have to look that up then.
Yes, no mistakes in codification.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
Administrative gerrymandering.
All right, I'm going to have to look that up. Go ahead and cue the music up for me, and let me do this. Everybody, thank you for listening. You are part of and listening to the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. Thank you for listening. I am your co-host, Mr. Bobby, and if you would like to get in contact with the show, call this number, which is 516-453-9921. Please, ma'am, please, sir, when you do that, press the number 1 button, and you will go to the top of the line, as Richard from California has done in Monica. You'll do that, and then that way I can give you your proper introduction, and then the world can hear you also, and we can move forward with the program. So please, ma'am, please, sir, do that so we can get your question on the air. You can also Gmail me at the number 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, at gmail.com. And for this week only, if I can, I will have them forward it to me so it could be read in the timely manner. Okay, with that being said, let's do this. The chat room is open. We have some people in there. So thank you, chatters, for being in the chat room. Okay, let me do this. Let me go to my men out in Cali. California people are in the house. In the 909, we got Richard. Richard, talk to me, bro. Talk to Mr. Fuller, bro.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for taking my call, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Fuller and Mr. Bobby. Okay, now here's my first quick statement and quick question. My quick statement is I think all solutions can be solved where the problem lies. Okay, now when it's coming to white supremacy, racism, or better yet, the culture of the construct of America, I believe is white supremacy, racism, as Mr. Fuller has stated. Now, as far as marching, I know the code goes against marching, but black people have been marching forever, okay, and white people have been marching with us. But do you feel that if white people said, hey, black people, stay home because we are going to have an all-white, non-black march for you, they are requesting that no black people partake in this march. It's going to be what I think for the first time ever in the history of the construct of the United States, that white people wholeheartedly went out and marched for black people. If they did that in cities across the nation, do you think that would have a greater impact on getting the problem solved rather than black people going out there, or blacks and whites, just all white people marching for black people? Do you think that would help solve the problem?
I think it could. You don't know if a thing will work until you try it. But I think that it would go substantial ways toward doing that. But better still, like the code says, if every white person would just make up his and her mind that they are not going to tolerate any mistreatment of anybody. That's all, real simple. Wherever you happen to be, you're a white person, you're on the planet. So you're not going to. You're not. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
You cut your radio down. Cut your radio down.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah,
go ahead, Mr. Fuller.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, Mr. Fuller, go ahead, please, sir.
Yeah, we discussed it at work, and then all my coworkers looked at me like that was the craziest thing they ever heard. And I'm thinking, well, how about if we try it? Because the other way clearly hasn't been working.
White people are going to have to solve the race problem anyhow, unless black people come up with a code that forces all white people, or entices all white people, which is what you're talking about,
right,
to change their minds. Otherwise, it's not going to get straightened out anyway. But I'm saying the white people who said, well, I'm tired of getting beat up on. Everybody calls me a racist and all like that. I'm not a racist. What do you want me to do? What do you people want? Now, a lot of white people ask that. And I've said just starting out two things, because the code book covers it. What do you say to white people when white people say, what do you want me to do? Because black people, we got a lot of slogans and whatnot, but we're not addressing white people about what they should be doing, except to say, do the right thing, which is an excellent thing to start with as a title. But that's a slogan. That's the title of a movie. Where are the ingredients? So the ingredients are, starting off, the two things that you ask for any white person, and it's in the code book. It's in the textbook of victims of white supremacy that you can get by going to producejustice.com. It's a list of things. Oh, hello?
Yes, I own the book.
All right. Well, it says so. It's two things right off the top. And that is a white person who wants to help solve the race problem does not knowingly say anything to a non-white person that is not true. That's number one. All right. Number two, a white person does not withhold constructive information. Like on a job, any white person that gets any kind of constructive information that can help a black person to better their position or get into a program or something where they can get more money or something, they're supposed to make a beeline to find that black person and the other black people who need help the most.
Right.
Help them in every way that they possibly can by doing what? Giving them constructive information. walking them through it. If they're ignorant about how to go about doing it and whatnot, fill in all the blanks. Show them how to go about doing what it is that will help them to get a better position, and everything that will help them get a better position in. Those are two absolute requirements for any white person anywhere on the planet who says he or she wants to help. Do not withhold constructive information. Information is power, constructive information. And never say anything to a non-white person about anything that is not true. Why? Because the white supremacists thrive off of confusion, and confusion is caused by what? Saying things that are not true.
Right.
All right? Just those two things will go a long ways toward helping solve the race problem. Now, it's a longer list than that, in the textbook. But those are two things right off the top, right on the job. If you're on a job right now, you can tell Mary or Sarah or Mr. Grimes or whomever who is white. You can just say, if they get into a discussion about race and what can they do to help, that's how you do it. They don't have to march. They don't have to go anywhere. They're right there at the office.
Mm-hmm.
Just clean up the office.
Okay.
That's all. You're right there. You don't have to go across town. Start with where you are, sir, ma'am, and start by helping all the black people that you can give help to. Give them constructive information and don't lie about nothing.
Very good. Richard from California, thank you for your call, and do not be a stranger, my brother.
Sure, well, thank you. And I'd like to say I'm still learning.
Oh, yeah, we all. Thank you, my brother, again.
All right.
Okay, let's move on down. Let's go to Monica from Monica. Let's see if I can get you on here, Monica. Okay, Monica, you're on. Go ahead. You can be heard. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Fuller, Mr. Bobby.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. My question is the word white supremacist. I know you don't like giving yourself credit, Mr. Fuller, but are you one of the first to start using that word? Because I was trying to do a little research. I'm 49 and just kind of researched the word, and I don't remember hearing that word a whole lot. Would you say you're one of the first or the first to first start using that word?
Well, I can't measure that, but I will say that I have been doing it, and I haven't been hearing anybody doing it up until about 2 years ago, and when it became real popular to say that. Everybody was saying racial integration, racial bigotry, racial discrimination, racial segregation, racial intolerance, dancing around the term white supremacy. Mm-hmm. Replace white supremacy with justice. That's what I've been trying to get people to say. Go right to the center of what we're talking about and stop dancing around with these fancy words that can send people off in all kinds of different directions. It's just one direction, the system of white supremacy. Replace it with the system of justice. White supremacy. Racism is white supremacy. White supremacy is racism. There's no other form of racism nowhere in the known universe other than the system of white supremacy. And that's what you call it. Replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. That's what people should say consistently. Stop dancing around it, talking about some kind of, racial profiling, racial discrimination, bigotry. Bigotry? What are you talking about? You're talking about white supremacy? Yeah, well, I'm including that. No. You're talking about white supremacy. Why can't you say white supremacy? I mean, it's the hardest thing, it seems, to get people to say that. Well, I just don't like to feel that, I don't like to feel that they are supreme. Anybody who tells you what to do and you better do it is supreme to you. Get that in your mind. And I'm talking about all of us.
Right. Okay.
If you are a prisoner of war and the warden is the warden, call the warden the warden. Don't try to dance around that. That's the prison master. If you're a slave, you have a slave master. Well, I don't like to say that he's my master. It makes me feel bad. Hey, you're a slave. You got a master. All right? Or you wouldn't be a slave without a master. End of story. Face it. Choke on it. That'll make you do something.
Yes, sir.
That's what the whole world. See, so call your things by the names they need to be called. So you have what? Clarity. Because you can't solve a problem if you're not clear about what you're trying to solve.
Absolutely.
Replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. That's the goal.
All righty. Monica, thank you so much, dear, for your call, and for you also, do not be a stranger. Okay, let's move right on down here. Let me see. Got Monica out of here. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. Richard from the great state of Texas. Richard, you are now, let's see if it buffers. There you go. You're now on with Mr. Fuller. What is your question, Richard?
I have two questions. They're very brief, but I want to very briefly, I'm not going to stay on long. Thank the young lady for that last question about Mr. Fuller's use of the term white supremacy, global system of white supremacy, because at 66, I first became aware of Mr. Neely Fuller Jr.'s teachings in, about 1983, 84. And so long ago, that was before computers, personal computers almost, and certainly before the internet. I'm coming to the point here. The point I'm trying to make is that Mr. Fuller was certainly using that term over 35 years ago. And I hadn't ever heard it anywhere before. And when he says that people didn't start picking up on it until the last couple of years, widely, he's correct, except for others like Dr. Francis Chris Welsing and people like that, with whom he is associated with. I hate to rush, because I don't want to spend a lot of time. Something you said many years ago, Mr. Fuller, stuck with me, and I have tried to pattern my life after it. You said, and you can correct me if I misquote you, if you have a message, keep stating the same message the same way. Did you ever say anything like that?
Yes, sir. If you have a problem, why try to find a whole lot of confusing terms to state what the problem is? The problem is racism, white supremacy.
Yes, sir.
Call it out as being that, and just keep that focused, and keep saying it, and keep saying it. That is the problem of the entire world. That's the number one problem.
Thank you so much.
The world is full of problems, but focus on that one. Because you can't solve the rest of the problems without that.
Okay, I don't want to cut you off. I would never want to cut you off. I just want to say that you were not dancing around it then, and you're not dancing around it now. And I just discovered you on the internet a couple of years ago, and it felt like I had been lifted up to heaven without dying. So I want to thank you for doing your work and keep doing your work. Now, my questions, two. There's two of them. And the first one you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I'm asking it because you bear an uncanny, and I mean uncanny, resemblance to the father that raised me. He was from Lenapaw, Oklahoma, and I've never been able to discover where you're originally from. So if you could answer that when we get off. And the second question is this. I have experienced over many years in dealing with black people, black organizations, black institutions, black clubs, cliques, cabals, whatever you want to call them. Black people don't seem to like to be asked questions about much of anything unless it's sports or somebody else's business. Now, Mr. Bobby, I'm going to get off, but if you would, keep repeating your email so that I can forward an image of the father that raised me to you, and you can pass it on to Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. Thank you both very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Richard from Texas. My email or Gmail address is the numeral 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, @gmail.com. That's the numeral 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, @gmail.com. Let's go to my brother. I was
Well, he wanted me to ask. He asked a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the question was, where was I from?
Oh yeah, you did ask
within
that,
the context of Oklahoma. I was born in Oklahoma, Muskogee, Oklahoma, October 6, 1929.
Muskogee.
Yes, Muskogee, Oklahoma.
Is that still in existence?
Say that again.
Is that town still in existence, Muskogee?
Well, I heard what's left of it is.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
At one time in the 1940s, it was the third largest city. I don't think it has that position now. But country and western star Merle Haggard wrote a song about it, so some people might be familiar with that.
I remember that, yeah.
Okie from Muskogee.
Yeah, I remember
so
that.
So that kind of gives you a picture of what he saw when he came through there. It's kind of off the rails, you might say, off the beaten track. And so, you can take that for what it's worth.
Okay.
But in answer to the second question about black people don't like to be asked questions, it's because black people have usually danced around answering questions because it usually meant if they answer a question, they're putting themselves in danger. Because as slaves, somebody's asking you questions, usually you think that what is coming is an accusation of some type. So that's natural for black people to be that way. But black people should embrace questions if everybody's willing to be questioned. See, we got to be equal about that. See, everybody should be able to answer the same questions. If you're going to ask somebody something about themselves, you should be able to reveal everything about yourself. See, so that's a part of the code.
Mm-hmm.
That's any question. Anybody who asks you questions, they got all these questions for you. You should have the same questions for them. That way we keep everybody honest.
Okay. All right. Merle Haggard, huh? I'm proud to be an Ogie from Muskogee, huh?
Yeah. We don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. I think that changed over the years.
That's two I learned. I told you that I love you. Now get out, and now this one. That's okay. All righty.
Traditionally, back in the 1940s, when you said okay, that was like saying the N-word.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. You're talking about some backward people. You talk about some people, first thing people would ask, Oklahoma, where is that? Is that on the moon? Who ever heard of Oklahoma? Of all places. And people in California, they sure know about it in the 1940s and in the late 1930s during the Depression. Because people left Oklahoma going to California and they turned them back at gunpoint at the border. No more Okies.
No more
Get
Okies.
out of here. Go back in that dust bowl where you came from.
All righty. I see Alchemy of Epiphany, I guess, has joined the conversation, and Brightness has joined. Hey, appreciate you joining. Did I get you, Ben? Let me see. Ben, did I get you or Ben, did I already get you or just another Ben? Okay, Ben?
No, sir, you haven't gotten me.
Okay, well, go ahead, Ben. I'm sorry. Yeah, and then we'll get to Monica. Go ahead. Imani. Go ahead, Ben.
Hi, thank you so much. One of the questions I had in mind was, I noticed that Mr. Porter always talk about this, and I think this is very crucial about how the white supremacists use words. Words is very, very important. I've been watching the news and about what's been going on in Wisconsin, and the young man that did the shooting. All of the papers and all of the media is calling this young man 17 years old vigilante. I don't understand that. And some of the papers actually even call him aspiring cop. expiring police officers. You know, this is maximum sophisticated confusion these people are doing. And when they use those kind of words, they understand the power of it. Mr. Porter, my question for you, if you can do that, how important is it for the white supremacy to weaponize words to keep the system of white supremacy going?
That's the cement that holds the system together. That's why the code says, and there is a word guide, you ask questions about words. One very prominent word, the use of the term America. And black people are still doing it. We say America. America did this to black people. America did that to black people. America is mistreating black people. That's impossible. Why? According to the code, which is supposed to be based on truth. Okay? Why is it that that's impossible? Because the word America has a definition. And the word America is synonymous with the word justice, or people who practice justice. And since nobody practices justice in the system of white supremacy, that's impossible. Then America is a concept, and that's all it is. It doesn't exist. So to accuse America, who are you talking about? Of practicing racism? We say America practices racism. Who are we talking about? Why can't we say who practices racism? And we covered this earlier, just a few minutes ago. Who practices racism? White supremacists practice racism. That's who, not America. Don't mix up words. Don't get words all tangled up with something else that leads you off into confusion, because the white supremacists thrive off of confusion. Now you get the label of being anti-American. We need to think about what we're saying. Just stop repeating what everybody else says and think about what every word means. America is a wonderful concept, but it's never been realized. It's never been produced. Like justice is a wonderful concept. Concept meaning what? Something that people think about, but it's never been produced. There's never been a situation in recorded history where people who needed help got the help that they needed. All of them.
Okay.
There's never been a situation in recorded history where people who were not mistreated. So you've never had justice anywhere on the planet in recorded history. So that's a concept too. But it's the same concept as America. It's the same concept as Asia, another word. Same concept as Africa, another word. They really don't exist. They are concepts. Concept meaning what? A thought, an idea, something to aspire to.
Okay. All right, Ben, thank you. Do not be a stranger. Let's see here. I think we got too many people, but I'll try my best. Alchemy of Epiphany says this. Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Question. Do you, Mr. Fuller, does Mr. Fuller feel he has made himself a leader by speaking so frequently instead of allowing black people to think more, which seems to be painful?
No.
Okay.
I have repeatedly said I'm nobody's leader. Don't follow Neely Fuller nowhere.
I have heard
what
you
am
say
I?
that. Mm-hmm.
I am a spokesperson. Now, what is a spokesperson? A person that speaks. So any black person out there, all they got to do is just speak. That's all I do.
Okay.
I'm just talking.
You're just talking.
I'm a prisoner of war, just like every other black person on the planet.
All
I'm
righty.
a fellow prisoner. And I'm just walking around in the prison yard just talking. And every other prisoner can talk. I'm not stopping them. All you got to do is just talk. Open your mouth if you got one and say what you think. Because that's what I do. I'm nobody's leader and don't intend to be. I'm not qualified.
Thank you, Alchemy. DJJ Home Loans, thank you for entering the house. Imani, quickly, we got about 2 minutes. You're back, and then hopefully we can get James in. Quickly, go ahead with your question right now. Go ahead, quickly. Okay, not
Imani.
James. Okay, Imani. Oh, I'm sorry, Imani. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Imani. Go ahead.
Yes, sir, Mr. Fuller. You have mentioned quite a few times the two things that white people should share with us. But what I was calling back for is the extended list of other things. I believe you have it in your revised, expanded edition. Could you direct me to at least the chapter, if not the pages, on where those other details? Because what I want to do is to type them up and frame them so I will have that list with me the next time I'm in contact with a white person to be able to ask them those questions.
I don't have it right there in front of me now, but I should have a note somewhere, and I got so much stuff spread out on my desk here in order to try to answer questions like you just did.
Could you at least give me the chapter or the people activity that it would be under?
I think I'm almost certain that it's under politics.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Because basically all I would have to do is just read the chapter, and
that's people relations, and I'll look through. I'm gonna have to look through my somewhat skimpy table of contents that might be there, but I don't think so. But it is.
I want to write that list up.
It's a substantial list, but everybody should. Everybody, and looking at that list, you should also add to any other thing that you think that you need to know when you're interacting with white people. See, everybody should be, the code is a guide, but it's endless until all problems are solved. So everything is just a start.
I think I found it. I think I found it.
Yes, it's pretty easy to find, I think.
Okay, thank you,
Imani. I think it starts with...
Whoops, sorry about that, Imani. I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought you were gone here. Okay, James, you're the last one. I got to get you quickly. Go ahead. You got about a minute. Okay, James.
What I'll do is I'll just call back. I'll call back later because I'm not going to have enough time to be able to state what I need to state with such a short period of time. I'll just call back later.
Okay, James from North Carolina. Okay, thank you very much, James. We appreciate that.
All right, enjoy the rest of your week.
Okay, thank you. DJJ Home Loan says, can we take a moment to acknowledge the bravery of Grandmaster J and NFAC, who is on code and has taken arms in a strong display of discipline and defense of black people in their historical formation in Stone Mountain, home of the KKK and Louisville. I don't know anything about that, but okay. Mr. Fuller, we got about a minute to go. Thank you, DJJ Home. Like I said, I don't know anything about that. Maybe somebody does. It can inform me. Mr. Fuller, we have about a minute. Please speak about your book for that 1 minute, please.
Yes, just go to producejustice.com. Just go to producejustice.com, and everything pertaining to the writings that I have out there is right there at that website. In fact, everything pertaining to what I do is right at producejustice.com.
Okay.
And you start from there to get the information.
All right. I'd like to thank you, everybody. Mr. Fuller, first of all, let me thank you to all of our callers. I want to thank you for tuning in and listening, all those that have been in the chat room, all those that are involved in the show, technicians, call screeners, everybody. Thank you for making the show what you have made it. It's not me. Thank you again, Mr. Fuller. We'll try to do better the next time. You've been listening to the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. and me, your co-host, Mr. Bobby. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Thank you. Thank all.